As the crow flies, it's just 350 miles from Los Angeles to San Francisco. It's also one of the busiest transit routes in the United States and is well suited to planes, trains, and automobiles. Hang on a second. Planes, trains, what? There are certainly planes shuttling back and forth between LAX and SFO, with, on average, about 11,000 passengers a day flying the route. And taking a car can be one of the classic American road trips. The meandering Highway 1 along the Pacific coast is the most scenic. Inland, I-5 is much faster and takes about 6 hours of non-stop driving. But taking the train is an entirely different story because you can't. There is no direct train link between Los Angeles and San Francisco. The nearest Amtrak mainline station to San Francisco is across the bay in Oakland. So it's hardly convenient and is certainly not fast, with a journey time of about 11 hours. That's partly why, 3 decades ago, authorities in California decided they needed a fast rail link between the 2 biggest urban conurbations in the state. Linking Los Angeles and San Francisco with fast rail would have several economic and environmental advantages.
We have very disparate regional economies. And so we have the Bay Area, which has a huge tech, Silicon Valley kind of focused economy. We have Los Angeles, which is just a massive, very diverse economic base. And then we have the Central Valley, which lags behind economically. And those places are not well connected today. That's the kind of thing that high-speed rail can do, is not just connect the endpoints, but also connect the places in between and tie them together. So a trip from Fresno to Silicon Valley goes from being a 3-hour trip to a 1-hour train ride.
The dream of high-speed rail in the United States is fraught with hurdles. Experts point out 3 major issues hindering the development of fast rail systems in the country.
The first is simply the lack of precedent. There's not really any purpose-built intercity rail in North America. There are some intercity rail services in the Northeast, routes like the Amtrak Northeast Corridor. It's not really high speed. I mean, the journey times are not bad, but it's certainly using, legacy infrastructure, and it's proving quite difficult to modernize. Issue number 2 is you've got to get the trains into the downtown, into the city centre, and that is not straightforward. If you don't have spare rail capacity to do the final, let's say 20 kilometres from the edge of the conurbation to the downtown city centre hub, then building a new line, possibly in a tunnel, possibly requiring an underground station, is hugely difficult. In the case of California, there is a rail corridor called the Caltrain, which runs into the center of San Francisco from San Jose, and the proposal is for the California high-speed rail services to share this corridor with commuter trains. But for that 50, 60 kilometre route, they won't be running at high speed. They'll be running at the same speed as the commuter trains. At the LA end, I think the range of mountains north of LA are a huge cost and engineering complexity. And I think getting into LA from the Central Valley is one of the big problems. I think the third major hurdle is simply the planning system, the level of environmental clearance you have to build a new railway, the regulatory environment, the sheer number of local administrations you have to go through especially in a democracy like the United States, like California. It can't be compared to China, where if the Chinese want to build a new railway, the government simply says build it, and it more or less happens in a much more top-down way. As I understand it, there's been fierce opposition in places, particularly in the Central Valley, which is the sort of inland area that the high-speed line follows between San Francisco and LA. It doesn't follow the coast. I think the planning system has been a huge hurdle as well.
Wading through the planning bureaucracy and acquiring the right of way has undoubtedly been one of the major factors in slowing progress.
For that 119 miles, we have had to acquire 2,300 parcels of land. Those are all individual negotiations with the property owners. Obviously, we have eminent domain authority, but we first try to reach agreement with the property owner for that acquisition. From there, we have had to move 1,800 utilities out of the way. And just in Fresno, we've had over 900 utilities. And sometimes the utility companies themselves don't know what they have down there, and you're coming across it and finding it and having to work out a design solution, which might have a right-of-way impact or whatever else. So that's all of the land preparation before you get to construction have certainly been big challenges.
Looking at the map, there is no bullet train or TGV heading straight from one urban center to another. Because of the geography, the route doglegs into the Central Valley out of Los Angeles and back into the Bay Area.
We want to connect places, not bypass them. When you look at kind of statewide history of investment in transportation infrastructure, when the I-5 was built, it was built on the western side of the Central Valley where there's no people. And it's a very straight route, and it does nothing to connect those communities to the rest of the state. Whereas Highway 99 is the main connecting road route, and this is the advantage of rail over airports. Airports are a point-to-point system, and so you're flying from this place to that place. Well, a train can stop in between. You can have intermediate stations, and you can serve them. You can have an express train, you can have a local train, or anything in between. The Central Valley is both the part of the state that has the biggest economic need, but also it's one of the worst air quality basins. And it's one of the fastest growing places in the state with over 5 million people. Fresno has over 500,000 people. It's the same size as Atlanta. These are places that are worth connecting and worth having on the statewide system.
When eventually completed, the track will run 500 miles between the main urban conurbations, with a travel time of 2 hours and 40 minutes. About a quarter of the route, 119 miles, is under construction in the Central Valley stretch. Eventually, some US record-breaking engineering will have to be done to link the two cities.
Now we're building the Central Valley stretch. We've also helped to electrify the Caltrain corridor here in the Bay Area, but to connect the two, for example, we have a mountain range to get through. And similarly, to get from the Central Valley to Southern California, there's 2 mountain ranges, and those will require substantial tunnel sections. So the longest tunnel that we have in Northern California is about 13.5 miles. The longest one in Southern California is also about 13 miles or so, which for the US would be the longest rail tunnels in the country. But those are certainly going to be big engineering works. I mean, this entire thing is a mega project. Those are individual, mega projects within the mega project.
Construction of the tunnels has yet to be started. In fact, there is a long way to go before the Central Valley will be connected to either of the two termini.
Northern California perspective has been, before we can even talk about building the tunnels, we need to do all the more detailed geotechnical investigations through that area, which is itself a 3-ish year process before we even issue sort of a design contract for the actual tunnel work itself. And so, the timeline is driven off of those next steps first, but those are the critical path items to connecting the entire state is the tunnel sections. They're the longest construction lead time, both lead time and construction time.
What appears to be a piecemeal project with parts under construction and others still in the planning phase has much to do with how the rail line is being funded, or more particularly, the lack of funding from central government.
When the interstate system was built across the country, the federal government paid for 80 to 90% of it. That's never existed for rail projects, and so I think there's always been this question of what is the right balance between federal and state share. And so for highways, it was 80% federal and 20 or less percent state. We've sort of been doing it the reverse, where right now it's about 25% federal and about 75% state funding.
Even though California is probably the 5th biggest economy in the world, it is just a state, and central, not local government has funded all other high-speed rail projects around the world. For a project, these significant funding issues are exacerbated by Washington's 4-year cycle of administrations.
One of the particular hurdles they faced is obviously changes in the federal government. Under President Trump, there was a much more hostile approach, I think it's fair to say, to public transport in general. And that meant that access to federal funding, which is a key element of the programme, was more limited. There has been a risk in recent years that the first segment of the railway to be completed is going to be in the least populated part of the state, which is not an ideal set of circumstances, I would suggest. And I'm not totally sure that quandary has been resolved.
When it was first imagined, a high-speed rail line was not seen as a commuter link. However, housing prices have skyrocketed over the years, particularly in San Francisco. This means living in the cheaper Central Valley and working in the Bay Area becomes more economically and socially viable. It also has another under-recognized boost for the economy of the poorer part of the state.
When Silicon Valley companies are looking to establish an additional office or some other processing location, they generally look at, Reno, Nevada, or, Phoenix, Arizona, or maybe Salt Lake City, because it's cheaper in those places. But it's partially because that's also convenient from a travel perspective. Basically, a 1 hour, 2 hour flight from headquarters. Central Valley cities, which have equally less expensive office space, factory space, warehousing space. What happens when that starts to become easy to get to? Do those companies now start to locate additional facilities in the Central Valley, for example? And again, there is a kind of a general economic theory that underlies this called agglomeration economies, that when you start to connect places together, when you make it easier to travel, you get better labor matching. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts, essentially, economically.
Even before the new Trump administration comes into power, some Republican critics in the state were calling for the project to be curtailed or even shut down. However, that is probably very short-sighted.
I don't see any sense in giving up. I mean, the construction's underway, and they have got a plan to get a 270-kilometre railway running by the end of the decade. The Italian high-speed rail network is a very good example of this, where it started, it stopped, projects were cancelled, there were government financial crisis, it took decades to complete the first section of the Italian high-speed network between Rome and Florence, which was perhaps the easiest from a geographical and topographical point of view. So I don't think it would make sense to abandon it. It doesn't surprise me that local politicians are saying that in California. My own personal view is that I think the California high-speed rail program could actually work as an express commuter rail service for San Francisco, because we know San Francisco and the Silicon Valley area and the Bay Area has some of the highest house prices in the world. And we also know that there's an area of kind of economic relative underperformance in the Central Valley. It would not surprise me if what we ended up with was a sort of express commuter high-speed rail service linking places like Fresno and Bakersfield with the job market in San Jose and San Francisco.
Even though the completion of the high-speed rail link between Los Angeles and San Francisco is still a long way off, small steps have been made in the Bay Area with the electrification of the existing track. It has only increased public awareness of the project and expectations.
We launched the electrified Caltrain service here in the Bay Area. The amount of enthusiasm for that was off the charts. And these are sort of the first modern electric trains that people are seeing on a corridor that's existed for 150 years. I hear the trains, from where I live. Like, my neighbors are talking about it. The kids at my daughter's school, she's in elementary school, are excited about electric trains. And so that excitement is palpable. And I think the more that people see of it, the more that the construction's happening, the more the stations are being designed, the things that people can feel and touch, I think that continues to generate excitement in the public.
It will be interesting to see if the enthusiasm will be translated into support for the further rounds of funding needed for the project to link California's two major conurbations by high-speed rail finally.
The recent milestone completing the electrification of the previously diesel-operated railway from San Francisco to San Jose, I think that's actually a small but really significant shot in the arm for the California project, because it now means that an electric high-speed train may not be running at high speed in the suburbs of San Francisco, but it can get out of the Bay Area, it can get into the Central Valley if they build the rest of the link down towards Fresno and Bakersfield. So I'm cautiously optimistic. We're not going to see San Francisco to LA in 3 hours. We probably won't see it at least before 2040, and I suspect realistically probably beyond that.
If the prediction is accurate, the construction time will be about twice that of the Egyptian pyramids. So Californians are in for a long wait to buy a ticket to speed from Los Angeles to San Francisco in the comfort of a train.
Remember to hit the subscribe button and ring that bell to stay updated with our latest content. And while you're here, why not check out another one of our exciting videos? Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.